Heaven Official's Blessing. Chapter 251. Audio source: WuXiaWorldAudiobook.com. Extra Aya. 10,000 Gods Cave. Spoiler warning. Some of the statues refer to Xie Lian's past in books 2 and 4. But I don't think they are particularly spoilerish, or that you need context for them other than the sex pollen scene in book 2 in order to appreciate this extra. As this extra is set after Book 5, there are also blink and you may miss it references to Book 5 events, but nothing which gives away the actual plot in my opinion. As Xie Lian laughingly pushed Hua Cheng, who was pressing down on him to the point that he could hardly breathe off his body. Their passionate mood having yet to fade, Xie Lian suddenly thought of something, and casually said, "Oh yes, San Lang, in the 10,000 Gods Cave." Hua Cheng's arm came up once again to Xie Lian's chest. As he played with goodness knows what, he said lazily, "Chen, what about the 10,000 Gods Cave?" Xie Lian said, "Nothing much, I just suddenly thought of it. With Mount Tonglu's eruption, would the many statues in the 10,000 Gods Cave have been fine? If that were indeed the case, it would be a huge pity. After all, every statue in there had been crafted by Hua Cheng painstakingly, and he liked them all." Hua Cheng said, "No, I had erected a barrier even before that. Even if Mount Tonglu collapsed entirely, the cave would still be fine." His interest piqued. Xie Lian said, "Really? That's great. Then it will indeed be alright. I want to go over to take a look. Can I?" Hua Cheng seemed to hesitate for a moment, but then casually smiled in response, saying, "Sure. Of course Gerger can go over to take a look anytime he wants to." His interest climbing, Xie Lian, "Then let's go tomorrow. After all, Mount Tonglu has been unlocked, and can be entered anytime." Hua Cheng raised a brow, saying, "Tomorrow. Alright." He did not express any objections, and nor did he say much more, but the next moment, he flipped back on top of Xie Lian. Xie Lian wasn't sure if he was mistaken, but in the latter half of the night, he was tumbled even more vigorously by Hua Cheng, such that after barely 2 rounds, Xie Lian was forced to cry for mercy, before passing out into slumber. He should have been able to sleep soundly until the day brightened. But less than an hour later, Xie Lian felt in his sleep a movement beside his body. When he opened his eyes to look, the other person was already gone. Startled, all sleepiness fell away, and Xie Lian sat up in an instant. After a perfunctory clean-up, Xie Lian slowly got off the day bed, and pushed open the door to leave, thinking, where did San Lang go? Going missing all of a sudden, in the middle of a night's sleep. It was indeed the first time something like this happened. After circling Paradise Manor once without even seeing the shadow of the person, Xie Lian remembered that there was a room in Paradise Manor that was used for teleportation, and so he went to have a look. As expected, someone had opened the door to that room. He remembered that a different array had been drawn on the door previously. And now, the cinnabar used to draw the new array had not yet even dried. Without thinking further, Xie Lian pushed the door and went in. When he emerged again, what was outside the door was not Paradise Hall, but pitch darkness. Xie Lian closed the door, and held up a flame in his palm, illuminating his surroundings. When he saw the sight that greeted him, he was stunned. To think that the destination of the distance-shrinking transportation array was a dark and gloomy giant cave. The 10,000 Gods Cave. Why would Hua Cheng go to the 10,000 Gods Cave on his own, in the middle of the night? Didn't they agree to go together tomorrow? Why did he come here first tonight? Shaking his head, holding out that flame, Xie Lian began to walk slowly in the dark and cool cave. The sounds of his footsteps echoed all around him. The gauze veils which were used to cover the faces of the statues had been removed. In the darkness that surrounded him, countless of faces, identical to his, maintained their silence. Just thinking about this image still evoked some terror. As Xie Lian passed a cave chamber, his gaze swept by casually. Within the cave was a statue of the crown prince who pleased the gods. A warm and kind expression in its brows and eyes, standing with a flower and a sword held in its hands, its posture beautiful. The number of statues here, at the highest estimate was 1,000, at the lowest estimate, at least 100. It was unfathomable how many long hours and how much painstaking effort Hua Cheng had spent to carve everything, and who knew how long the statues had spent in the darkness, silent. This thought occurring to him, Xie Lian sighed. Facing the statue, he bowed his head slightly, murmuring, "It must have been very lonely." He was referring to the person who had carved the statues, and also to the statues. The statue of the crown prince who pleased the gods nodded. Xie Lian. This was too frightening. After standing frozen for a while, Xie Lian finally figured out what had happened. It was largely because his magical energy had just been topped up, and his entire body, from head to toes, was brimming with magical energy. Because of this, his standing here affected the statues, causing them to come to life. Xie Lian hastily reined in his magical energy, but it was too late. The statue of the crown prince who pleased the gods had started to take a few steps. Because it had been afflicted by Xie Lian's magical energy, which had been so abundant to the point of overflowing, and yet because no one was trying to control it with serious intent, its movements were clumsy, and it tripped and fell with a dong. Xie Lian hurriedly helped him up, saying, "Careful." Helped up by him, the small smile on the statue's face remained unchanging, and it even slightly raised its head, a noble and proud expression on its face, as it nodded at him in thanks. Seeing its proud demeanor, Xie Lian couldn't help wanting to laugh but resisted, saying, "Have you seen Hua Cheng?" Statues could make simple noises but didn't know how to speak, unless it was a statue of a god who had passed the gift of languages and tongues. When the statue of the crown prince who pleased the gods heard his question, he revealed a confused expression, as though it did not who he was talking about. Xie Lian suddenly understood that him at that time did not know Hua Cheng. And so, he changed his question. "Have you seen a person dressed in red?" At that, the statue finally gave a smile, and nodded its head aloofly. Xie Lian said, "Do you know which direction he went towards?" Such a big cavern, and he wasn't familiar with it either, so his only fear was getting lost. The statue hummed and pointed out a direction for him. Xie Lian said, "Many thanks, Your Highness." After walking for a bit, he turned back. The statue of the crown prince who pleased the gods seemed to have rapidly grasped the mechanics of walking, and was even practicing swordplay where it was the posture graceful and excellent, as though performing before the gaze of thousands of audience at the festival. A pity there was no one to admire. After not too long, Xie Lian once again encountered another fork in the path. Naturally, he readied himself to ask another statue for help, and walked into the nearest cave. The moment he entered, he saw a human-shaped figure sitting on a stone altar, clutching a jar of wine and drinking desperately. Xie Lian. In a flash he snatched the wine jar away, saying, "Stop drinking." That statue was also of him, just that its face was slightly clearer, and its white clothes no longer as luxurious. When Xie Lian had snatched the wine jar away, it tried to snatch it back but in its muddled state could not, and grew so angry that it could only turn in a circle, before suddenly hugging Xie Lian and crying noisily. Xie Lian was dumbfounded, and said, "You don't need to cry." The statue cried even harder, as though it had been wronged and bullied endlessly, and no longer snatching for the wine, just hugged Xie Lian and refused to let go. Xie Lian didn't know that he was such a sticky drunk, and had no choice but to hug the statue too, gently rubbing its back, comforting him. "It's all right, it's all right." On a second look, the wine jar in his hand did not even contain wine, so it didn't matter if he returned the jar to the statue, and he said, "Have you seen a person dressed in red? Which way did he go?" The statue pointed him towards a path, and Xie Lian returned the wine jar to it, before continuing to move onwards. The statue had stopped crying, hugging the wine jar as it sat on the ground, once again falling into a stupor. Turning his head back look at it, Xie Lian sighed, and continued moving forward. After yet another while, he heard a gaji sound, like the sound of metal chains scraping against each other, as he came before an expansive cave. A swing had been affixed from the roof of the cave, and on the swing sat a statue in high spirits, full of youthful energy, dressed in the clothes of a son of the royal family. It was him at approximately 16 or 17 years old. The statue held onto the metal chains of the swing, doing its best to send itself aloft. But because it was sitting on the swing, it was simply unable to lift itself off, and it showed a frustrated expression. Seeing the situation, Xie Lian came up and helped it with a couple of pushes. The swing finally began to fly, and with that the statue that was dressed in many robes was finally happy. Xie Lian seized the opportunity to ask, "Have you seen a person dressed in red? Which way did he go?" The statue clutched the swing with a hand, and pointed out a direction with its other hand. Xie Lian pushed him again a couple of times, and said, "All right, goodbye." But after the swing lifted up about 10 more times, it gradually came to a stop. Without anyone to push it, the statue of the youth sat there again in a daze, once again showing a frustrated expression. For a while, Xie Lian estimated, "This should be it." At that moment, he suddenly heard a small sound that was muffled and full of pain, and he couldn't help but startle. "What's that sound?" Panting. That sound came from the cave just ahead. Xie Lian walked in to take a look. Set within the cave was a stone altar, and on that altar seemed to be a statue lying down horizontally, a white gauzy cloth covering it from its head to its legs and hanging towards the ground. The figure beneath the gauze was indistinct, sometimes curling up into a ball, sometimes tossing and turning, as though the person beneath was being tortured and was struggling in the torment. Xie Lian was about to go up and pull off the gauze. A hand from behind him covered his eyes. A low voice came from the same direction, sighing. "Gurgur." Xie Lian gave a laugh, and said warmly, "San Lang, do you think that just because you won't let me look, I won't know what this is?" After a long while, Hua Cheng sighed again, saying, "Gurgur, I was wrong." Xie Lian took Hua Cheng's hand off, and looked back, saying, "Tender fragrance." 2. Standing behind him was a tall and lanky man dressed in red. As expected, he was Hua Cheng. Caught on the spot, a hand on his forehead, he finally admitted, "Yes." No wonder. As to be expected, no wonder Hua Cheng had always refused to let him look. Xie Lian said, "You coming here tonight, was your intention to hide away this statue before I came?" Hua Cheng looked in another direction, and said, "Yes." Xie Lian didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Did he really not dare to let him see the statue so much? He said, "Why hide it? Actually, it's not really a big thing. It's just that now, a tricky problem has appeared." And that tricky problem was Xie Lian's arrival had unintentionally caused all the statues to be able to move. This in itself wasn't a big thing, but for this special statue it would have been very painful. This was because the statue beneath the gauzy cloth was one carved of Xie Lian at 17, in the cave in the wilderness, struck by the tender fragrance. For the other statues, be it practice swordplay, drink, swing on a swing, whatever they wanted to do was fine. It was just this statue that was unlucky, having been afflicted by the terrible venom of the flower demons. This meant that after it came to life, it had to suffer the torment of the venom. The heavy panting coming from beneath the gauzy cloth was full of unbearable pain, and listening to it, Xie Lian could hardly bear it. Remembering that soul-wrecking and bone-aching night, he said, "This is surely too pitiful. If I were to leave now, would it revert to just being a statue? If so, then it wouldn't need to suffer such torment." But Hua Cheng said, "I'm afraid not. After all, Gurgur's magical energy is more or less at its strongest point now, and all the statues in this cavern have been affected by you. Even if you left, they would continue to move for a long while. That was simply far too painful. Xie Lian said. Then, is there another way? Hua Cheng always had a plan. He nodded his head slightly, and said, this was what I was sorting out just now. Gerger, come with me. He led Xie Lian into another cave. The moment they entered, Xie Lian's eyes widened faintly. Standing in the cave was the statue of a male. Its figure tall and lanky. Its brows and eyes handsome. The corners of its mouth slightly curved, an eye patch where its right eye would have been, more or less resembling the red-garbed person in front of him who had led him here. To think it was a statue of a ghost king. Xie Lian said, this is. Hua Cheng said, this was something I had hurriedly carved after I discovered that the situation was not right. Having not done it for many years, I'm a bit rusty. Gerger, take a look. Does it look like me? After examining it careful for a while, Xie Lian said, very like. But, Hua Cheng said, but, what? Xie Lian smiled and said, but not as good looking as you are in person. Hua Cheng laughed too. Following up swiftly, Xie Lian spoke again. And so, San Lang, the plan you spoke of, was it? Was it to let this ghost king statue help the god statue which had been poisoned by the tender fragrance venom? Release the venom. After staying silent for a while, Hua Cheng forced a smile, recovered his composure, and fixing his gaze on Xie Lian's face, said, yes. At first, Xie Lian did not notice the slight cautiousness in his expression, and thought, surely this method is too. Although it was one method of curing it, with immediate effect. But even just thinking about it felt absurd to the extreme, to put it bluntly. Wasn't it to use the Ghost King statue to break into the body of the statue of himself as a youth, and from there to release the venom? Even saying it out loud felt difficult. As he struggled for a response, Hua Cheng suddenly went down on a knee before him. Xie Lian was startled, and hurriedly tried to pull him up, saying, San Lang, what was he doing? Hua Cheng said quietly, Your Highness, I was disrespectful. Xie Lian was unable to pull him up, so he crouched down to join him and, uncomprehending, said, How are you disrespectful? But Hua Cheng stared at him, and lightly sucked in a breath, saying quietly, Your Highness, please believe me, it was because there was no choice today that I came up with this. Even though I had personally carved that god statue, but I never had even a bit of blasphemous intent or disrespect towards the statue of Your Highness. If Your Highness feels that this method is not appropriate, I'll find another method. At last, Xie Lian realized why Hua Cheng was being so somber. Going to the root of it, towards the whole matter of him having personally carved so many statues of Xie Lian, Hua Cheng was ultimately worried that Xie Lian would find him offensive, his actions perverse. To bring up this method now, it was inevitable that he would be even more worried that Xie Lian would think that his head was full of nonsensical thoughts and that his sentiments were not respectful. Xie Lian smiled as he sighed, and with both hands pulling on Hua Cheng, finally pulled him up to standing. He said, Of course I believe you. I know that you've always been very respectful of me, but never had even a bit of blasphemous intent or disrespect. That was harder to say. After all, if one kept track, since Hua Cheng returned after turning into butterflies, every 3 or 5 days, he would want to blaspheme the god at Qiandang Temple, growing more and more daring. Xie Lian coughed, saying, I feel that this method doesn't have anything bad. It's very good, very good. But thinking about what this method essentially was, his cheeks heated up slightly, and he felt that his speech was perhaps too reserved. Meanwhile, though Hua Cheng, who had received his permission, gradually recovered his calm, Xie Lian placed his hands on the shoulders of the Ghost King statue, and said, Shall I give this statue a spark? Hua Cheng blinked, and laughed slowly as he said, If Gerger is willing, I won't refuse. Xie Lian nodded. Immediately, the statue lightly arched a brow. Seeing the situation, Xie Lian couldn't stop himself and retrieved his hands, saying, This way it's far too similar. As though having felt something, a few figures slowly appeared outside the cave. A few of the god statues gathered around curiously, as though wanting to look at the new statue in this cave which did not resemble the rest of them. The Ghost King statue appeared to have noticed them too, and blinked its eye, and its brow lifted even higher as though thinking about goodness only knew what, even as it appeared to be searching for something. With a mix of coaxing and shooing, Xie Lian finally managed to push aside the group of statues of himself, but after glancing from the corner of his eye, suddenly said, "Where's the tender fragrance statue?" He had started to use this directly to refer to that unfortunate statue. At some unknown time, only a white gauzy cloth had been left on the stone altar, and that prone tender fragrance statue had disappeared. Xie Lian reflected on what a disaster it was, and even Hua Cheng, who had followed behind with his hands behind his back, raised his brows. Xie Lian said, "The 10,000 Gods cave is very large. It wouldn't have been unreasonable to leave in such a short time. Let's hurry up and look for it." But Hua Cheng said, "I'm afraid not. Gerger, look." He pointed towards the ground. Xie Lian came over to look, and only then did he discover that the ground had a circle array drawn directly into the rock with an extremely strong finger strength teleportation array. How much of Xie Lian's magical energy did this statue absorb to be able to draw a teleportation array with its bare hands? Xie Lian wanted to faint on the spot. That statue was of him when he had been afflicted by the tender fragrance. What if it ran into mortal females after its escape? What type of strange and bloodthirsty legends would arise after today? He said. When did he run off? Where could he run off to? Hua Cheng said, "Gerger, don't panic. First, think, if it was you who had been afflicted by the tender fragrance at that time, who would be the first person you would look for?" This was not a difficult question. Xie Lian was originally not too anxious, and he calmed down quickly, saying, "I would look for." Before he could finish speaking, a message on the spirit communication array appeared. Caught unprepared, Xie Lian raised his hand and received it, and heard Feng Xin's voice ring loudly by his ear. "Your Highness, something terrifying. There was a creature impersonating you just now." As expected. At that time, Xie Lian's strongest and most effective assistants were Feng Xin and Mu Qing, and if something like that happened, he would naturally look for them first. Thank goodness the statue looked for Feng Xin first instead of running wildly in the streets. Xie Lian released a breath, and hurriedly said, No, that's not a creature and it's not impersonating me." Feng Xin was shocked. "What do you mean? Not a creature and not an imitation? Don't tell me it's you yourself? That can't be." Xie Lian, "Not that either." "Alright, what's it like now? Have you caught it? Don't let it escape." But Feng Xin said, "Too late, it's already escaped." Xie Lian said, "What? That's bad." Feng Xin, "Yeah, that's bad. Naked and running around. What would people say when they see that?" Xie Lian, "Wait, what did you say? Naked? No, it isn't wearing any clothes." Feng Xin said, "More or less. It's wearing clothes, but not much, all broken and raggedy as though someone had torn it up." "Oh yes, if it's not a creature and it's not an imitation, then what on earth is it? What the heck is going on? It looked to me like a statue." "Wait, a statue?" he exclaimed. "Did it escape from that place in the bottom of Mount Tonglu? What are you guys doing?" Xie Lian also could no longer quite remember how much clothing he had been wearing when he had been struck by the tender fragrance. At that time, it had felt unbearable, and he may have torn his own clothes up in his stupor. He said, "I'll explain later. I'm coming over immediately." Having said that on this side, he disconnected the spirit communication array and said to Hua Cheng, "San Lang, we need to go to Immortal City." 5. On the other side, Hua Cheng had already sorted out the newly carved Ghost King statue, turning it into a smaller statue that could stand in the palm of his hand. He said, "Alright," and drew an array in seconds. Barely any time had passed when the two of them directly appeared at Nanyang Palace in Immortal City. The moment the door opened, they saw Fengshen, and the moment Fengshen saw Hua Cheng, his eyes grew round. Crimson Rain Flower? What are you doing here too? What did you come to the heavens for? A supreme-ranked Ghost King, all day refusing to stay obediently in his territory, instead going up to the Immortal City whenever he felt like it. This was far too inappropriate. Hua Cheng ignored him, and cocking his head to listen for a moment, said, "Where's the bulletin? Surely the upper heavens is not just all words and no follow-up action." Fengshen naturally knew what bulletin Hua Cheng was talking about. Wasn't it? The upper heavens must report for a whole year on the heroic exploits of Crimson Rain Flower as he rescued the gods. Bulletin. A vein pulsed in his forehead, and he said, "What's there to report on in the middle of the night? Everyone needs to rest. We'll report on it in the day." At that, Hua Cheng made an "oh" sound, as though to indicate that he would not pursue the matter further. Xie Lian said, "All right, as everyone wishes. More importantly, where's the me that you saw? Which way did it go?" Fengshen pointed at a direction, saying, "He ran there. I was just about to give chase when the two of you come along." Suddenly, the feeling of an ominous premonition appeared in Xie Lian's heart, and he said, "Let me ask that direction. Could it be?" Fengshen said crisply, "The direction of Zanjian Palace." Xie Lian. Hua Cheng said in a deep voice, "Go." The two of them didn't dare to delay, and hurried to Zanjian Palace, bursting in through the main door and rushing in immediately. Upon rushing in, they saw Muqing sitting on the altar, looking as though he had just seen something unthinkable, his entire person in a state of dumb shock. Xie Lian went up to him and waved a hand before his eyes, saying, "Muqing." Seeing Xie Lian, he finally regained his wits, but his expression remained one of extreme shock, and only after a long while did he say, "Xie Lian, what are you doing?" Xie Lian, "I did something. I too don't know what I did. Please tell me." Muqing, still staring, said, "Why did you run into my palace just now, in the middle of the night, with your clothes in disarray?" Hua Cheng smirked. Xie Lian said, "Don't speak in a manner that causes people to have misunderstandings. Whatever it was that you saw just now, that definitely wasn't me." Muqing rubbed at half of his face, as though he wished he could dig out whatever he had seen from his eyes. With a pale and sickly pallor, he said, "Even if it wasn't you, its connection with you is inescapable. It's a statue from that cavern, isn't it? What are you guys doing, letting such a statue that is harmful for society's morals run loose in the middle of the night? Surely Crimson Rain Flower, and you do not need this type of play." Hua Cheng said mockingly, "What's that got to do with you?" Muqing said angrily, "What do you mean, what's it got to do with me? This is my palace." Hua Cheng said leisurely, "Rebuilding the Immortals City, I had a role in it too." It was the truth, for the upper heavens had suffered great damage previously, and so a number of gods had to secretly beg the head of Ghost City for help. Calculating it properly, it would not have been possible for Immortal City to have been built without Hua Cheng. Xie Lian said, "We weren't playing around. This was an accident." "Where is it now?" Muqing said. "He snatched a sword from me, and ran." Even without him having to say more, Xie Lian knew where it would have gone. From the garden outside Zanjian Palace came a dang-7 noise. At the same time, the tiny statue of a ghost king which Hua Cheng had brought dropped down itself and hopped towards the garden. Xie Lian rushed out immediately. As expected, that tender fragrant statue was standing at the fake mountain in the garden. The clothes of the statue were in disarray, revealing more than half of bare shoulders and chest. The clothes on the bottom also had pieces that were missing, giving a suggestive appearance overall. The design of the statue's face was yet another level. Its brows drawn together tightly. almost as though one could see the red flush staining its skin and the thin layer of sweat covering it. To call it a piece of uncanny workmanship would not be too far off the mark. And before their eyes, the statue was holding the sword it had snatched from Zunjan Palace. Dang, 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 dang. And trying its best, again and again, to stab itself. Naturally, it had thought of doing what Xie Lian had done that first time, using self-injury to release the venom. But because stones formed in Mount Tonglu were strong, the sword just could not pierce through, but instead bent and broke. The statue seemed to despair, and raised its palm, looking as though it was about to hit its head until its skill shattered. Xie Lian hurriedly called out, "Stay calm, stay calm." The statue looked at him blearily. Xie Lian flew across and, with a blow, knocked the statue off the fake mountain and, causing it to fall into a hole in the cave where it was unable to stand. And Watching darted to Xie Li inside, and threw down something. It was the statue of the Ghost King. Rather than say that the Ghost King statue had been thrown down by Watching, it could also be said that it had struggled to free itself upon seeing the youthful statue god, and with one struggle left his palm. It reverted to its original size midair, and landed on top of the body of the god statue, covering it. From beneath there came a startled breath. Xie Lian hurriedly jumped off the fake mountain and pushed Muqing, who had ventured over after hearing noises, back towards Zunjan Palace, saying, "There wasn't enough time. I'm so sorry, let us borrow your precious ground for a bit." Muqing was shaken. "What were you two doing just now?" Xie Lian said. "I'll explain another day. 1,000 apologies." Watching said languidly. "What's there to apologize for? Haven't you saved this person's life lots of times?" Muqing said. "No, you'd better explain it clearly now. I seem to have seen you throw you down," and he threw him down. "My eyes aren't mistaken, right? So what on earth are the two of you doing? What's happening right now in the fake mountain?" At that, Xie Lian began dragging him back inside the palace by his neck. "A terrible emergency. Really, Muqing, don't go over there. Why would you want to bring suffering onto yourself?" Muqing roared. "Xie Lian, what did you guys do in my palace? I'm fucked. I'm really fucked. It wasn't us. This is just an accident. There really wasn't enough time. And you're rambling again." After an hour, the two statues finally used up the magical energy which they had gotten from Xie Lian and Watching. Going into the fake mountain and to have a look, Xie Lian immediately rested his forehead in his hand. As Watching sorted out the statues, Xie Lian stood at the side, silently blocking Feng Xin and Muqing, who had wanted to come over and take a look. He said sincerely, "You wouldn't want to see this." Feng Xin was naturally not a curious person, and sensing that something was not good, immediately had the wits to back away in defeat. Muqing, however, was unable to let it go, and his face was as black as the base of an old pot, and furiously flung his sleeves and muttered, "I simply can't believe. I just can't believe it. To think there's such a thing. To think that such a thing could happen in my palace." After that, it was as though his soul had floated out of his body, and he was no longer able to look directly at the fake mountain in his own palace. Xie Lian very much suspected that he would be leveling this area with a blow later on. To speak the truth, Xie Lian himself didn't have much confidence. To think that there could be such a ridiculous accident, he really didn't know if he should feel embarrassed. Looking back at the two sta no, as of now, they should be considered one statue, he said. "They'll remain like that?" Watching said. "Just like that. Anyway, they can't be separated." Xie Lian covered his face. Which heavenly official had a statue in such a position? What if someone saw it? It was just simply too improper. How infuriating. He moaned. "San Lang, these. Hide them well. Don't let anyone see them." Watching laughed. "That's a given. Gerger can relax." After bringing these two statues which had become one, back to the 10,000 Gods Cave, and back to their original place, Xie Lian finally wiped the sweat off his brow. and the other Xialians in the 10,000 Gods cave once again gathered around curiously, and had to be once again coaxed away by Xialian. "It's indecent, don't look. It's indecent, don't look." The statues had no choice but to leave. Although they did not get to look at the final position of that statue, they kept looking back as they walked away, as though envious that the tender fragrance Xialian finally had a companion. The tender fragrance venom had been released, but the other statues were still lacking something. The crown prince who pleased the gods didn't have an audience. The drunken one had no one to help up. The one on the swing didn't have anyone to push it. Xialian couldn't help but feel greedy, and thought, if only every Xialian had a Huacheng, then that would be alright. Unexpectedly, Huacheng also said the same thing out loud. "Gurgur, don't you feel that it would be better if every Your Highness had a Sanlang?" Two people had come together easily. There and then, they stayed in the 10,000 Gods cave, where they displayed their skills. In moments, Xialian witnessed with his own eyes the process of how Huacheng turned a clumsy-looking rock into an exquisite stone statue. The skill was indescribable, because Huacheng was simply too fast for him to have a clear look at what Huacheng was doing. Thinking about how Huacheng had melded technique with method from early on, Xialian only had praises left. All in all, Huacheng turned around and, from a ground strewn with broken rock pieces, lifted a newly carved child, its hair messy, its clothes ragged, its face covered with bandages, looking very pitiful. And in its hands it clutched something which he would not let go of. Xialian placed his hand on the child's head. Almost immediately, it blinked, and turned its head looking all around it. Seeing that there was someone holding onto the back of its collar, it gave a vicious kick. Huacheng seemed to have anticipated that it would do such a thing, and dodged easily, holding it into his arms and letting it struggle and kick as it would. Xialian did not expect that the little Huacheng would be so fierce-spirited, and unable to hold back a laugh, said, "Aye, how fierce." Huacheng tisked Ed, and threw him aside. Thus thrown, the child fell sprawled onto the ground with a dong, but it got up again very quickly, and stared at Huacheng with a fierce glare. Xialian was worried that it had fallen too hard, and extended an arm towards it, saying, "Sanlang, you are too vicious. What if it gets damaged in the fall?" If one was really counting, this child was practically a newborn. But Huacheng said, as though nothing was the matter, "It's all right." He's very tenacious. The child was incredibly fierce towards Huacheng, but towards Xialian it was friendly and companionable. Seeing Xialian gesture towards it, it was just about to go towards him, when at that moment, the statue of the crown prince who pleased the gods that was not too far away, seemed to sense something, getting up from its place and walking over, its gaze fixed in their direction. Seeing the statue of the crown prince who pleased the gods, the child froze, and the one eye that was visible through the bandages grew really large, and it sprinted over noisily, as though wanting to catch him, to fall against the front of his robes, but at the same time didn't dare get too close, as though afraid of dirtying the god's robes. Only after a long while did he carefully raise out his hand, opening the palm which he had just now stubbornly refused to open. It turned out, hidden within his palm, was a flower. As though receiving the flower, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince gave a small smile, and raised out a hand, and of his own initiative carried him up, and the two of them left happily together. Looking at them, one of them had finally found someone to appreciate his swordplay, and one of them had finally found someone he could offer his flower to. Watching them, Xialian felt quite reassured, when he suddenly thought of another question, and said, "Sanlang, when you're done carving, won't this cavern be filled with lots and lots of statues of you and statues of me? Would they get each other mixed up? After all, another of them look alike." But Huacheng laughed quietly and said, "No, they won't." "Why?" Huacheng repeated, "They won't." He lifted his gaze to look at Xialian, and with a faint smile, said, "Even if your highness gets it wrong, I will never to get it wrong." because each Hua Cheng will forever be the follower of only one. Your Highness will only be devoted to one person, and so they never will. And Xie Lian gazed at him, and said, I, too, won't get it wrong. Each Xie Lian's most devoted follower will forever be just the one. I will forever remember this. Having said that, he suddenly felt oddly embarrassed. The two of them now were like two small children, ardently declaring to one another that the person I like the best will forever be you, and only you. Even though it was sincere, it was also very childish. Even though it was childish, it was also very sincere. After a moment of silence, Xie Lian gave a light cough, and said, Then, next, let's carve for the Crown Prince, His Highness on the swing, a Ghost King, His Mightiness, to push the swing. Without anyone to help it push the swing, it looked very lonely and distressed. Hua Cheng said happily, All right. Xie Lian said again, What about that one drinking wine? That one's rather tough to figure out. It seems all muddled up, and even Christ. There are too many statues in this place. Goodness knows when we'd be done carving for each and every one. Hua Cheng laughingly said, What are you afraid of? Let's just take our time. Eventually they'll meet. Smilingly, Xie Lian nodded his head too, saying in a light voice, They definitely will meet. Within the cavern, two statues that were originally separate had now joined together into one. Embracing each other tightly, gazing at each other's faces so close to their own, their gazes and their bodies tangled together, never to be undone. That was truly being together, never to part. MXTX Author's Notes. Happy April's Fool Day. This is the second last extra. Tianguan is just left with the last extra. Translator's Notes. Pinyin, Shen Shang, lit. God, Shen, statue image, Shang. Because it's a bit of a mouthful, I'll just be translating this as statue s, unless it's necessary to distinguish between the different types of statues, God statue versus XXX statue. Pinyin, Wen Ru Shang, the shape-shifting sex pollen flower creatures from Book 2. Literally translates to gentle, Wenru, village, Shang. I will translate this to tender fragrance, to be consistent with the term from Book 2. Pinyin, Huo Ren Jian Gui, lit. A live person sees a ghost. An exclamation used when you see something terrifying or bizarre in a possibly supernatural way. I loved the number of question marks and exclamation marks in this conversation. And I love how function automatically assumes Hua Cheng's involved too. Pinyin, Shen Xian Jing, lit. New Immortal City. Just like how there's a ghost city where ghosts live, there's an immortal city where gods, immortals live. Literally, Hua Cheng's eyes narrowed. Pinyin, Mi La Mi Yan, which is used to describe someone smiling in a manner that results in the eyes becoming like slits. Unfortunately, narrowing his eyes doesn't have the correct nuance in English, like a metallic clang. Thus far, the Chinese word for it has been used when referring to the statues. But here, Hua Cheng uses the word for he. Assuming it's deliberate, I guess we could regard it as Hua Cheng talking about himself. One of the few times we get Hua Cheng really mind. The words for it and he sound the same in Chinese, so Xie Lian would not have heard the difference. End chapter.